A loud boom cut through the sky as something fell fast, tearing through the clouds like fire. The small cargo pod spun wildly before crashing deep into the alien forest, shaking the ground. Smoke rose from the broken machine. And inside, a young human boy groaned in pain. His name was Max, only 16. Small for his age, but clever with machines. He had been on a simple delivery run when the engines failed. And now he was stuck. Max pushed the broken door open and climbed out, coughing from the smoke. His shoulder hurt, his suit was torn, and his food rations were almost nothing. Still, he was alive. And that was something. The forest around him looked strange: purple trees, glowing leaves, and buzzing sounds in the distance. He checked his wrist communicator, but there was no signal, only static as night fell. Max started a small fire and sat close, trying to stay warm. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong, a cry, soft and full of pain, echoing through the trees. He stood quickly and grabbed a metal pipe for protection. The cry came again, closer this time, and it didn't sound like an animal. From behind the trees, small figures appeared. They walked slowly, their eyes glowing faintly, their bodies thin and tired. Max froze, unsure if they were friendly or dangerous. The creatures didn't attack, they just stared at him. One of them, a little alien girl, stepped forward, holding her hands up. She was shaking, her face full of fear and curiosity. Max lowered his pipe slowly and knelt down, showing he meant no harm. He reached into his bag and pulled out a protein bar. The little girl looked at it, then at Max, and took it gently. She ran back to the others, and they all shared it, their eyes wide with hunger. That's when Max understood. They weren't dangerous. They were starving. He motioned to them, asking if they had a home. The girl nodded and pointed toward the hills. Max followed them, walking slowly through the thick forest. After some time, they reached a strange village made of stones, scrap metal, and broken machines. The place looked empty, quiet like a ghost town. Homes were falling apart, and many looked abandoned. But there were signs of life: dim fires, weak lights, and eyes watching from the shadows. Max saw old machines covered in vines, big tubes that led underground. He guessed these were once food makers, but now they were dead and silent. The little girl led Max to an older alien, tall and thin, with tired eyes. He looked at Max carefully, then spoke in a language Max couldn't understand. Still, Max pointed to the machines, then to himself, then made a fixing motion with his hands. The old alien's eyes narrowed, then nodded slightly. Max smiled and walked over to one of the dead machines. He opened the panel and saw wires, tubes, and parts, some familiar, some not. But it was clear these machines were Earth-made or copied from Earth designs. Max's mind started working fast. Maybe he couldn't call for help, but maybe he could help them. He didn't have many tools, but he had junk, lots of it, from his broken pod. As he worked, villagers gathered, watching in silence. They didn't trust him yet, but they were curious. Max found a broken fan, a battery cell, and some wires. He tied them together, hoping to restart part of the system. It was a risk, but they needed hope. And so did he. Hours passed, and his hands were cut and dirty. He connected the final wire, held his breath, and flipped the switch. Nothing happened at first. Then a spark and a weak hum began. One light blinked on the machine, and a soft whirring sound followed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The old alien stepped forward, touched the machine, and looked at Max. For the first time, he smiled, just a little. The little girl clapped her hands softly, and others began to whisper in surprise. Max looked around at their faces, tired, scared, but filled with new light. He knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep in the forest, something else stirred. Something that did not like the machines coming back to life. But for now, the boy from the stars had given them a spark of hope, and hope was more powerful than anyone could imagine. The next morning, Max woke up to the sound of soft footsteps around him. The villagers had gathered again, but this time, they didn't look afraid. They stared at the small machine he had fixed the night before, still humming quietly. It hadn't made food or water yet, but it had come to life. And that alone felt like a miracle. The little alien girl handed him a bowl of something warm. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Max nodded in thanks and looked around the village. The homes were built from whatever they could find: stone, plastic, even broken metal sheets. The people had survived this way for years, barely getting by, and now they had pinned their silent hope on a boy from another world. Max knew he couldn't let them down, not after what he saw in their eyes. He wandered outside the village walls, exploring the edges of the forest. Soon, he came across a huge pile of discarded junk: twisted metal, broken machines, torn wires. To anyone else, it looked like trash, but to Max it was treasure. He smiled to himself and began picking through the pile, pulling out anything that looked useful. A group of curious alien children followed him, watching as he muttered to himself and filled his arms. They didn't speak his language, but that didn't stop them from helping. They picked up coils, gears, and panels, bringing them to him with excited eyes. Max laughed softly and nodded, placing the parts into a large container made from an old barrel. Back in the village, he set up a small corner for his work, his own tiny workshop made of garbage. He drew on the dusty ground, showing the kids a picture of what he wanted to build. It was a simple design, just an idea for now. A machine that could filter water from moisture in the air using basic power and pressure. He had read about it in school, never built one before, but he had to try. The villagers didn't interrupt him, but the elders watched from a distance with unsure eyes. They had seen machines before, and many had failed. One of the elders approached Max that evening, holding a broken radio in his hands. He set it down in front of the boy and pointed, as if to say, "Fix this first." Max understood the challenge, took the device, and opened it slowly. It was burned out, missing parts, but not impossible, with a few wires from the junk pile and a battery from his ship. Max brought it back to life. The elder blinked in surprise as the static-filled radio hissed softly. Then he looked at Max and for the first time, bowed his head slightly. The villagers noticed, and whispers spread through the crowd like fire. The boy wasn't just lucky, he had real skill, real knowledge, and maybe, just maybe, he could do what no one else had done. That night, Max sat by his workshop with the little girl by his side. She pointed to the stars, then to him, and said something in her language. He didn't know what it meant, but he smiled anyway. She giggled and rested her head on his shoulder. Max didn't know how long he would be here, but for now he wasn't alone. Far away, deep in the mountains, strange lights flickered and pulsed. Old sensors had been triggered. Something had been turned back on. A forgotten force had noticed the boy's actions and wasn't pleased, but Max didn't know that yet. He only knew that trash could become something new, something better. And if he could just build one working invention, something simple, something helpful, then maybe this broken village wouldn't stay broken forever. The humming from the boy's corner grew louder each day. Max had taken over a ruined storage shed near the village square. He spent his hours surrounded by scrap, wires, and melted plastic. The children brought him more broken pieces, and some even started copying his work. Laughter returned to the village, soft and unsure, but it was there. Then one morning, shouting broke the peace. An elder stormed into the square with 2 guards behind him. He held a broken water pipe in one hand and pointed toward Max with the other. The machine Max had been building had tapped into a buried line without permission. The elder shouted words filled with anger, his voice shaking with fear and pride. Max stood still, unsure what he had done wrong. He tried to explain with gestures, pointing to the water line, the machine, and the purifier, but the elder wasn't listening. He saw danger, not hope. The village had suffered from broken machines before, many of them sent by outsiders. They had trusted technology once, and it had only brought silence and dust. The villagers gathered, eyes darting between the elder and the boy. The air felt heavy, like something was about to break. The little girl stepped forward, standing in front of Max with her arms out. Her voice was soft, but her words carried across the square. Everyone stared in silence as the elder's face slowly changed. He looked at the machine again, the spinning fans, the soft lights, the gentle hum. He saw it wasn't leaking or overheating, or shaking with danger. It was calm, steady, alive in a way they hadn't seen in years. His pride wouldn't let him accept it right away. He dropped the pipe and walked away without saying a word. Max let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The little girl looked up at him and smiled before running off to join her friends. That evening, Max sat alone near his workshop, staring at the machine. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if maybe they were right to be afraid. But then he heard footsteps and saw the same elder walking toward him with a bowl of food. The elder placed it beside Max without speaking, then sat down beside him. They stared at the machine together, letting the silence speak for them. The elder tapped the side of the machine gently, then tapped his own chest. Max nodded slowly, understanding that trust had begun. Just a little. The machine whirred quietly, pulling moisture from the air and filtering it through copper coils. By the next morning, Max had managed to collect a small cup of clean water. He held it up, and the villagers watched with wide eyes as a single drop slid down the side. It wasn't much, but it was water. And it hadn't come from the sky or a well. It had come from trash, heat, pressure, and human hands. The little girl took the cup and sipped it carefully, then nodded with a bright smile. The crowd clapped softly, almost afraid the sound might scare the moment away. Max grinned, dirt on his face, grease on his shirt, but something new shining in his eyes. This was working, piece by piece, wire by wire, but far beyond the village, something was watching. A pulse had gone out from the old systems when Max reactivated the lines. Deep in the hills, an ancient alert blinked to life for the first time in decades. Buried tech from long ago began to stir, and whatever had been sleeping there did not like the idea of change. The boy had awakened more than a machine, and soon, someone or something was going to answer. Rain hadn't touched the village in over a year, but that morning, something even rarer fell from the sky, a clear drop of water from a humming machine. The children gasped and ran to show their parents, holding tiny cups with wide smiles. The purifier Max had built was small, noisy, and shaky, but it was alive, and more importantly, it was working, one by one. Villagers brought old parts to Max's workshop. Not trash anymore, but gifts, offerings, tiny sparks of trust. An old woman brought him a broken solar panel. Another gave him a cracked heat coil. Max smiled at each one, adding the pieces to his growing creation. He was no longer just the strange boy from the sky. He was their tinkerer, their builder. The machine grew taller, stronger, louder, and with it, the hopes of the village rose. Every hour it ran, it gave back drops of water and the faint smell of clean air. Max knew it wasn't enough, not yet, but he was close. He connected extra fans to draw more air, added heat traps to speed the process, and every time he made a change, the kids cheered like it was magic. But just as he tightened the last bolt, the ground gave a small tremble. It was soft at first, like a distant drumbeat, but then it came again, heavier, closer. The villagers stopped and looked toward the hills. A scout rushed into the square, breathing hard, his eyes wide with fear. He said one word that every alien in the village understood: raiders. Max didn't know the word, but he understood the fear in their eyes. The villagers scattered, pulling children inside, hiding food, covering entrances. The machine was wrapped with cloth and branches, hidden as best as they could. Max stood confused until the little girl grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the healer's hut. Inside, she pointed to the window and drew shapes in the dirt, tall figures. Weapons, black eyes, a group of nomads, Max guessed, ones who took whatever they wanted. He peeked outside and saw dark shapes moving down the hill. There were 5 of them, covered in armor made of bone and rusted steel. One of them carried a long spear with wires crackling at the tip. They looked strong, angry, and hungry. The leader stopped in front of the elders and demanded something. Max couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They wanted supplies. The elder offered dried roots and a few tools, but it wasn't enough. The leader pointed toward Max's workshop, his voice rising with interest. Max felt a chill when he saw the raider's smile. Teeth sharp and eyes cold. The elder tried to lie, saying the machine was broken, just decoration. But the humming sound still leaked out from under the cloth. The raiders stepped closer, ready to tear it apart. Max stepped forward from the hut, holding something in his hand, a sparking tool from his ship. It glowed with heat and crackled softly, not a weapon, but it looked like one. The villagers gasped as Max walked between the raiders and his machine. He said nothing, just stood there with the tool raised. The leader tilted his head, curious, then stepped forward with a mocking smile. Max stayed still, his heart pounding, his hands sweating. He pressed the tool against a broken crate, and it burst into flames. The fire flashed bright, and the raiders stepped back quickly. The leader narrowed his eyes, then barked something at his men. They turned away slowly. Their message sent, this wasn't over. Max waited until they disappeared back into the hills before letting out a long breath. The villagers came out in silence, staring at the boy, with something new in their eyes, respect. That night, the little girl brought Max a rough blanket and sat beside him. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The stars above shined quietly, and Max looked at the machine glowing in the dark. It wasn't finished, not yet, but it had already started to change everything. And far beyond the hills, the signal of the purifier traveled deeper than anyone expected, waking not just enemies, but ancient things buried in the soil, under rusted metal. Something opened its eyes. It had waited a long time for sound, heat, and movement. Now it knew a human had come. A quiet fear hung over the village like smoke the next morning. The machine still hummed, the purifier still worked, but the joy was gone from the air. The raiders hadn't attacked, but they had left behind a warning, one they would return to collect. Max stood beside his machine, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the hills. He wasn't a fighter. He had no armor, no weapons, just a head full of ideas and a heart that wouldn't quit. The little girl found him at sunrise, clutching a small stone charm tied with thread. She placed it in his hand and gave a soft nod, then pointed to the forest. Max understood he had to finish the purifier, but now he needed more than just clean water. He needed protection, power, and maybe a plan the raiders wouldn't expect. He grabbed his tools, slung his bag over his shoulder, and followed the girl into the trees. They walked for hours, deeper into the forest than Max had ever gone. Old roots curled like claws around fallen metal, and strange lights blinked beneath the moss. Finally, they reached a wide cliff that overlooked a broken dome built into the side of the mountain. It was half buried, full of cracks, but Max saw something familiar: Earth tech, human design. The girl pointed toward a broken hatch, then stepped back, letting Max go alone. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. He turned on a small light and moved carefully, stepping over shattered screens and bent beams. It looked like an outpost, maybe a research station from long ago. He found a control panel still faintly glowing and tapped the screen. To his surprise, it blinked to life, showing words in a language he could read: emergency power online. Max's heart jumped, and he quickly explored the room. He found a damaged solar grid, cracked batteries, and something strange: a defense core. It was small, shaped like a sphere, humming weakly with fading energy. He picked it up and felt warmth pulse through his fingers. The core could power shields, deflect energy, or overload small circuits, perfect against raiders. But it needed a better power source, something stronger than broken batteries. Max scanned the room again and spotted something in the corner: a forgotten drone. Its core was shattered, but its shell was intact, covered in plating and cooling coils. He smiled to himself and whispered, "You'll do." Back in the village, the elders waited with tense eyes and quiet words. The machine had produced more water that day than ever before, but it also sent out more heat, more noise, more signs that could attract more danger. The healer tried to calm the frightened mothers, while the children gathered near Max's empty workshop. Then, just as the sun began to fall, Max returned, dragging a metal sled behind him. The purifier stood taller now, surrounded by strange rings and glowing strips of salvaged tech. Max worked through the night, connecting the drone shell to the defense core. He added a coil that hummed with stored heat and wrapped everything with shielding cloth. By morning, the purifier didn't just make water, it made a soft pulse in the air. Something invisible, but strong. The villagers stood around the machine, feeling the change. Their hair lifted slightly, and the air smelled sharper. Max stepped back, wiped his face, and looked at the horizon. He knew what was coming, and sure enough, the black shapes appeared again. 5 raiders. And this time, they weren't alone. A larger figure walked among them, wearing a helmet with glowing eyes. He raised a spear, and the villagers stepped back, clutching tools and sticks with shaking hands. The leader shouted something and pointed straight at the purifier. Max didn't wait. He stepped in front of it again, calm but ready. He touched the side of the machine, and the shield core lit up. A pulse exploded outward, silent, invisible, but strong enough to knock dust into the air. The raiders staggered back as their weapons sparked and hissed. One of them dropped his blade, another fell to his knees, covering his ears. The large figure shouted again, but now with anger and hesitation. Max didn't speak a word, just stared, letting the machine speak for him. The leader growled, turned, and gave a sharp order. The raiders pulled back slowly, defeated without a single blow. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the enemy vanished into the trees. Then cheers erupted, not loud, but full of life. Max turned to the little girl, who smiled up at him with wide, glowing eyes. The purifier kept humming, stronger than ever, but deep beneath the mountain. The old outpost systems flickered again. A signal had been sent far across the stars. One Max hadn't meant to trigger. And now, something very old and very powerful was listening. The night after the raiders left, the stars above the village began to flicker strangely. Max stood outside the purifier, watching the sky as if it were about to speak. He didn't know why, but something felt wrong. Not here, but far, far above. The machine buzzed louder than usual, its lights blinking like they were trying to warn him. He adjusted the heat coils and checked the defense shield, but everything looked normal. The little girl came to his side and gave him a small piece of bark with drawings on it. She had drawn him standing between the villagers and the raiders, his hand on the machine. Max smiled at her, but his thoughts were far away. Something had answered the signal, something old and awake now. And whatever it wasn't coming to help. Next morning, the air tasted like metal. The birds that usually chirped around the trees were gone, and even the wind was quiet. Max tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on the purifier. He had added a second filter now, one that could break down plant waste into clean liquid. It wasn't perfect, but drops of thick green water were already forming in the collection bowl. The villagers were amazed, some falling to their knees just to touch the bowl. For the first time in years, no one talked about leaving the village. No one whispered about hunger or sickness. The elders started calling Max by a word that meant maker, and the children began copying his workshop, trying to build their own little machines. But then, a sound came from the hills, not footsteps, not voices, but a low hum. It echoed like thunder rolling through stone, steady and unnatural. The scouts ran back, pale and wide-eyed. Speaking fast to the elders, Max ran to the edge of the village with them, his heart sinking as he saw what was coming. It wasn't raiders this time, it was something worse. A large figure moved through the trees, taller than a house. Its body was metal, rusted but strong, and its face was covered with a cracked helmet. Old Earth tech, walking and alive again. A forgotten war machine, maybe once used for mining, now marching with purpose. Its eyes glowed red, and its arms spun with saws, drills, and plasma cutters. Max realized it must have come from the old outpost. triggered by the purifier's signal. It didn't see the villagers as people, it saw them as intruders. The machine paused, scanning the village, then began charging its weapons. Max shouted and waved his arms, trying to draw its attention. The villagers scattered, hiding in homes. Clutching each other in fear, he ran to the purifier, quickly rewiring the defense coil and adjusting the frequency. He connected his ship's last energy cell, hoping it would be enough. The giant machine stepped into the clearing, towering above Max like a mountain. It raised its arm and charged a beam that hummed with power. Max activated the shield just as the beam fired. A blinding light exploded across the square, cracking the ground and shaking the trees. The defense pulse pushed back with a loud sonic wave, and the beam split apart. The giant staggered, smoke rising from its chest, but it wasn't finished. Max knew he had one chance, one move left. He grabbed a copper coil, ran forward, and threw it onto the giant's open panel. The coil sparked as it touched the circuits, sending a surge through the monster's body. The machine froze, its lights blinking wildly, then let out a loud, broken roar. Its legs buckled, and with a final groan, it fell backward into the trees. The earth shook as it landed, and the air went quiet again. Max fell to his knees, breathless, his fingers still tingling from the electricity. The villagers came out slowly, staring at the fallen metal beast. Then they turned to Max and raised their hands in silent thanks. He had not only brought water, but protection, ideas, courage, and with just broken junk, he had defeated something even the old stories feared. The little girl hugged him tightly, tears running down her cheeks. That night, Max sat alone with the purifier, patching its wires and cleaning the burned pieces. He looked up at the stars again, wondering if more old machines were out there, waking up. He knew now this planet was once full of human tech, abandoned and buried. And every time he fixed something, the ghosts of that past began to stir. Still, he wasn't afraid anymore. He had a village to protect and more machines to build. And maybe, just maybe, this broken world could still be saved. The village bells rang at sunrise, not as a warning, but as a song. A new crop had bloomed overnight, bright, green, and strong. The villagers stood in silence, staring at it like it was a miracle, and maybe it was. The soil that once swallowed every seed now breathed life. The air smelled fresh, rich with hope and warmth. Children ran barefoot through the fields, laughing, chasing bugs that had returned. Even the animals had come back, small ones hiding near the roots. The land was no longer cursed. At the edge of the field, Leo sat on a rock, his clothes torn, arms covered in bandages. His eyes were tired, but his smile was real. Beside him, Saya handed him a piece of fruit, grown just hours ago. He took a bite, and his face lit up like a lantern. The villagers clapped without needing a reason. They weren't just alive, they were living. The fire tree hummed gently behind them, rebuilt and stronger than ever. The purifier stood taller now, its pipe shining under the morning sun, and next to it, Leo had started something new, something smaller. A little machine that buzzed and blinked and grew one drop of medicine from weeds. Every day, he made something better. Every day, the junk around him became something useful. The elder stood before the people and raised a strange object high into the sky. It was a bent pipe, blackened at the edges, useless to most eyes, but to the village, it meant everything. It was the first piece Leo had ever touched, the one he turned into a water drip. "This saved us," the elder said slowly, his voice shaking. "And so did the one who carried it." He turned to Leo and placed the pipe in his hands. "You gave us more than machines," he said. "You gave us a second life." Leo tried to speak, but his throat tightened. He looked at Saya, then at the villagers. He pointed to them, to the crops, to the machines, then to his heart. He didn't need words. They understood. Later that day, the villagers held a quiet celebration, not with music or fireworks, but with food, cooked over warm fire. Shared with smiles, they gave Leo a small stone necklace, carved with their symbol for family. He wore it proudly, pressing it to his chest every time someone thanked him. Night came slowly, wrapping the village in soft darkness. The machines kept humming, glowing softly like stars on the ground. Leo sat on the roof of his hut, staring up at the sky. A single satellite blinked far above, a reminder that Earth still existed. Somewhere someone might be listening, but he didn't feel alone anymore. Saya climbed up beside him and handed him a new drawing. It showed the village, strong and green, and a human boy in the center holding the sun. Leo looked at her and smiled. Not everything needed to be fixed with metal and wires. Some things were repaired with kindness, and so the boy who fell from the sky stayed, not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as one of them. They once called him the trash boy. Now they called him the builder of tomorrow, and long after the stars moved across the sky, long after the old machines slept once more, the village would tell the story of how a boy turned garbage into hope and saved them all.